Okay, I've been reviewing some of the videos I made, and it's really embarrassing. I really hope I'm getting a little better at this. Between the noise, the background sound quality, and bouncing around sheets and not being clear, I'm really gonna try a little harder. And I'm gonna make at least 3 videos on something I find really exciting. First, I'm going to show you this is a file that's going to work through, and at the end of the day, it's going to have compare 3 kind of scenarios. A diesel only. You have an island, and you have to get some electricity to the island so you can build a diesel plant. Okay. Alternatively, you can combine the diesel with the solar plant. I don't think you can build a pro, solar farm uniquely without the diesel because it's going to be nighttime sometimes. And then we're going to add battery to the solar and put battery and solar and diesel. Sometimes we won't even run the diesel, but we'll put them all together. And this is going to be an analysis. It's going to be a little step above the kind of standard LCOE analysis, and we're going to compute the savings if you just have solar and diesel, and then look at whether battery helps it, or in this case, I'm skipping to a different carrying charge rate, carrying charge assumption, or hurts it. And I'm going to show you kind of how to do this. LCOE, I don't know. LCOE doesn't quite really tell you the story. It gets close. Okay, so now once we really begin this analysis, the first step, I hope you can step back and see the key thing here. I'm going to put it back to, how about I'll put it to a base case kind of assumption. And in this case, the solar helped you a little. Now I'm going to put a whole lot less solar in here. Okay, don't worry. Please, 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 don't worry about some of these details right now. But the key thing here is we have a scenario where we're going to compute the levelized cost of diesel. It's just a levelized cost analysis where we start with the cost per kW, put the fixed cost in, put the variable cost in, and the final thing that's really necessary is we need some sort of capacity factor. And if this is an island, I'm kind of saying, well, the capacity factor and the load factor are the same thing. Capacity factor measures the percent of time you run a plant. Load factor compares the total peak load you have to the average load. Now, if you don't have any reserve margin, which is kind of maybe an extreme assumption, and you just build your capacity to meet the peak load, the two are exactly the same. Okay, that's extreme. And by the way, this is supposed to be extreme. I'm trying to show you a simple island example. You can then take this and extend this to all sorts of very, very complicated things. But I'm going through and trying to explain the economics of computing solar, the value of solar power in this kind of context. Okay. Now, I want to show you that when we look at this one, and please, this time, just look at this top one. Just concentrate on this one. Now, if we have one of the things that drives the value of solar power is how does your load compare to the pattern of solar power you get. So I took an example of a single day on our island, a hypothetical example of 24 days, and put some loads in. And one load is the thing I had before, which is just a simple flat load. and then our savings are 17% in this example. Then I said, well, let's make our load higher during the day when the solar is higher and lower at night. And then I said, well, let's do the opposite, make it non-coincident, which means you need most of the load for lighting. And then look at how our savings changed. I'm going to explain how we get all of this stuff. And hopefully I'm going to try to explain it clearly. I'm freaking out a little bit by how badly I do some of this stuff sometimes. Now, I'm going to show you that the driver of this analysis is, to a large extent, the cost of the solar panels, or the solar project, of course, the diesel fuel price, and really, really importantly, the carrying charge rate. I'm going to also show you here that sometimes it's better to put more solar capacity in than you actually can use. So if you've got a extreme kind of peak in the day, it might be better to put more solar and waste some solar power. And I just showed you, I hope, that it depends on the load shape. Now, the mechanics are that we begin with the load, and we subtract the solar, and we get the remaining diesel power. And then the key part of this whole thing is you're going to need some diesel generation on an island no matter what. Let's not pretend that you can look at the levelized cost of diesel versus the levelized cost of solar. I'm not being negative to solar here. I'm just being real. And you better compare the solar cost, including the capital cost, to only the diesel variable cost. And I just said it might be worth having more solar capacity if you've got a really low solar cost compared to diesel cost. It might be worth putting extra solar panels in more than you actually can use on the sunniest day. And I'm going to show you just how much it depends on carrying charges. And I'm also going to show you then how much solar should you really put in. And in order to do that, we'll use the solver tool in Excel. And I'll show you a couple of other issues, how to reset some solar prices. So let's look at the first issue. Let's look at a couple of the drivers very quickly. And this is before I'm really explaining what the mechanics of some of the calculations. Sorry about that. I hope that's not too out of order. Perhaps let's start with this one called variable load, which isn't anything in particular. It's got a little bit lower down here and all of that. Now, if we put in this scenario, here we've got a peak load of 10, which isn't really the same as the solar, but whoops, let's put a solar size of 10 megawatts in, okay? I'm just going to start with that. Now, clearly, if you put a lower solar cost of the project in, you get a higher savings. On a lower cost, you get a lower savings. And here's the real key is to go down kind of here, and we have a diesel-only scenario. In our diesel-only scenario, okay, we went through all of the cost of the diesel, the fixed cost, the variable cost, the heat rate, everything. The fuel cost is the heat rate times the fuel cost per MMBTU. You just work through MMBTU per MWH times USD per MMBTU gives you their MMBTUs in the top and the bottom. It gives you USD per MWH here. And then you put different lifetimes. Now, in a different video that not too many people have watched, I put in all of this analysis of carrying charge rates, and that depends on the lifetime of the plant, the construction period, and all these cost of capital, the inflation rate, the equity return, the debt return. And this base case has a fairly, I suppose, low equity return. Maybe it's more aggressive than you might think a base case should be. So you put all of these things in and you get a carrying charge. In this case, it's a little less than 5%. And then I'm going to say, well, we need 10 megawatts of our diesel, and that gives us a load factor. And the load factor is the average of the load for a day divided by the peak load for the day. And I'm going to say that's the capacity factor. We're going to make a diesel plant that's just exactly the right size to just meet our requirements. No extra reserve margin or anything else. You could, of course, put that in. And that means in this scenario with this loads, we need 165 megawatts for the day. And if we take that and multiply it by 8,760, this was taking the daily load factor multiplied by the capacity to get a typically hourly load, and then multiplying it by 24, 8,760. And then we just multiply the energy by the fuel cost per megawatt hour to get the total energy cost. And for diesel, not surprisingly, you get a fuel cost is the biggest, by far the biggest factor. Now, if you change the fuel cost, of course, you're going to get a higher solar savings. If you lower them, it'll be less. And I use the futures price, and I put a reset button here. Okay, the futures price, and in another video that maybe you can go back and watch, and maybe not, I got all these future prices and converted them to USD per MMBTU. And then I said, okay, well, let's allow you to change that and put it upwards or downwards or anything else you want. I'm just checking the time. Okay, and what we might want to do is we might want to just take that number and reset it. And we don't really need a true false. There's no true false here. All you need to do on this one, it's such a simple one, you say name the range of this sensitivity variable that's getting pushed up or down when we do this one. But if you reset it, just make a little range name and just take that sensitivity. This thing is equal sensitivity. If I press control and the bracket and it goes there, this is the same thing. It just changes the sensitivity. And then if I should have, maybe I could copy this little thing. It's just a true false, and it's just attached to a little bit of a macro. And all that's going to do is it's going to put the sensitivity back. So maybe you're really yelling at me for kind of getting a little off track and showing you some of this little Excel stuff in the middle, but that's kind of, I'm going to continue trying that sort of style. Now, please don't look at this battery thing right now. This should be almost off. Okay, so this shows you that solar is affected by the cost and the diesel. Now, the other thing that's dramatically affected is by the cost of capital and the carrying charge rates. In this best case, we assume 85% leverage, only 5% equity return, and we assume an inflation rate of 3%. So you're really in real time only making 2% on the equity, which is not really very good, and then a low risk-free rate and a low credit spread and everything else being really, really positive, and then you get a savings of 18%. But then we kind of go to the worst case, and in the worst case, we put a much higher return on equity, a lower inflation rate, so the real return is 11%, and then put a higher risk-free rate, higher credit spread, and all that stuff, and a less advantageous depreciation rate. And look at the difference in the carrying charge rates between the best case, which gives you 3%, and the worst case, which gives you 12%. And if we put those two in differences, we get 6% savings when we have the really bad case, and we get 18% savings from putting solar in. Now let me show you how we actually put the solar in. I made some assumption about how solar works. And I said, okay, well, this is just kind of the pattern over a typical day. And I'm going to say we're along the equator, so the winter and the summer isn't different. Of course, you could have done this analysis for summer and winter and done all sorts of different things. All I did is put a little different one with a lower capacity factor and a higher capacity factor. By the way, if you're looking at this, you can see if we get a higher capacity factor, we get 23%, lower, only 10%, and higher, 23. Whoops, what was our base case was 18%. Okay, now the way this all works is we first put in, I put a pattern in for the solar power. This is just an input. Okay. This is the pattern during the day. Excuse me, just a minute. Okay, here is the hour of the day. And then this is the different pattern we have. And I say there's no electricity during the night from solar. I don't think that's surprising. And then we have three different kind of scenarios across the day, and then we just use the index function as always to pick one of those three. Here is our solar pattern, okay? And then we say, okay, well, let's take that solar pattern up here and then put an amount of solar capacity in and just multiply it together. Now, in this case, I started in hour 9 and kind of went backwards to 1, and that's because hour 9 is when the solar capacity started to be produced. Okay, now when we put all of this together, then we get, okay, let's put solar and diesel together. And in this case, I said, well, the solar cost is $950, not an unreasonable number, and then we have fixed cost for solar, but of course we don't have any variable cost or heat rates or anything else. So when we get down to the bottom, finally, we put a 10 megawatts of solar in with some load factor, and the load factor in this case is not exactly the same as the capacity factor. Just a minute. Now I just put a flat solar pattern in here. So in the other case, we had 10 megawatts, and we couldn't even use the 10 megawatts in the highest kind of thing. So somebody, a wonderful person from the Massif Central, he told me, boil things down to the simplest kind of thing you can do, and then you can get more complicated. It's such a good advice. I've been trying to do that. Okay, so let's just put a simple load pattern in. And then in the diesel, we use 240 megawatts hours per day. In this case, we get 50 solar, which is the 10 megawatts times our load factor and all that. And that means that we need 190 of diesel, not the whole thing. Okay, and that means I can't believe that I didn't kind of add these together. That's how much we need per day. This is how much we need over the course of the year, how much we get from solar versus how much we get from diesel. And then the nice thing is, and this is not complicated, it's the same kind of thing. You multiply how much energy you're using over the course of the year times the fuel cost, how much capacity you have times the variable O&M times the energy, the capacity, and this is, since it's in per kilowatt, you have to multiply by 1,000. How much is the fixed cost per kilowatt per month multiplied by the kilowatts you have? And finally, how much is the carrying charges? And then, of course, the solar has no fuel cost, but for the same amount of energy, you have a whole bunch more capacity cost. But when you put them all together, you get 10 million or whatever from diesel only, and 9 million from solar. And that's our 15% savings. Okay, I hope I did it okay. All right. Now, the interesting thing for me about this one is the next thing we're going to show you. So I think we've shown you a little bit about what some of the drivers are, about a little bit of the mechanics, perhaps, I hope. And now I want to show you that it's sometimes really worth. What happens if we put more solar power in? If we put more solar power in, look, it says solar wasted. If we don't have a battery, and we put more and more solar in, it's actually giving us it's giving us a better savings. Now, here's the real thing, and I think perhaps I should have really put a little arrow here, because we're comparing the total cost of the solar times the variable cost of the diesel. That's what we're really doing to look at the economics. And we can if we put a higher amount of solar in, the LCOE of the solar goes up. And the reason the LCOE of the solar goes up is now we're kind of wasting things. Our capacity factor relative to what I call the load factor, which is purely based on the pattern of sunlight, this actually goes down because we're wasting some of it. But we're still, even after we wasted it, because our capital costs and our capacity charges are so low, in this case it's a best case capacity charge, it's better to put a whole lot more solar. And then, oops, now it's going down. Now we're wasting too much. And you see, we just hit an optimal amount some here. So, at a point here. Now, once you have that, so then we're getting 24%. Now, if we instead did this on a worst case, this is really bad. We only get 5%. In this case, we might have to, if we put it down, we might get less savings because the capital cost. So our optimal amount of power changes. How do we figure out this optimal amount? It depends on the load patterns. It depends on everything else. It's not simply putting it in. And here's how you do it. You go and you need to use this solver function. And I'm in 23 minutes, so I think I can finish this. I'm going to do this relatively quickly, and you can look at this file. It's called Solar, Diesel, and Battery, and see how it kind of works. But the first thing you knew, if you want the solvers, you got to go to Options, and then you got to go to Add-ins. And after you go to Add-ins, you press Go. And then you click on the solver. I clicked on the Analysis Tool Pack 2. And then you go to Data, and lo and behold, you have this solver add-in. And in the solver add-in, this time, you have to be careful. It can only work on one page. Now, this total amount of solar capacity here, and I'm going to now finally just I finally press Control-Alt-C. I press this one that says Color the Sheet. Okay, and now this is an input. I hope you can see, okay? Don't worry about the battery capacity right yet, but you can kind of see what are the inputs and what are the calculations. Now, I took this percent savings. This comes from our summary sheet. Suppose I could have, let's make it I don't know, some kind of, how about green sheet? All right, I'm sorry to keep doing this, but I'm terrified that somebody might just watch one video and not really see all this work on the generic macro. This comes from the green sheet now, and we want to maximize this savings and change the solar production to get there. Now, what you can do is go to this solver, once you have the solver, and it happens to be that I'm on the wrong thing. So we put the maximize this, and the only thing we change is our solar production, and I'm going to put no constraints. So this is about the easiest thing you could do with the solver, I think. We just maximize the savings, and we see what kind of solar capacity we have to do to put that, and then you just press solve. And then it's hopefully, it might not give us exactly the same. It gives us an answer. It said we should have put 16.67, which is more than the amount we need. We're going to waste a little, and then we can, whoops, I seem to have done it twice. I better close it. Okay. And then there's our number. And we have some wasted, shift control 1, we have some wasted, little bit of, not a little bit, quite a bit of wasted solar energy. Not that bad. And we, now our cost of our solar is pretty high, but that's because we put so much in, we wasted it. Of course, I hope you see where I'm going. Oh, this is the worst case, so that's why it was the thing was a little bit higher. We could do this in the base case thing. Now I'm changing this. Now when I change this, it's going to give me a different optimal amount. Now, to get that optimal amount, you could put a macro around the solver, just like you put a macro on the GoalSeek. It's one of the biggest macros. But when you do that, you have to be so careful. I'm going to go to assign macro. And there are a couple of things. The most important thing is when you put the solver, even with the new Excel, you've got to go to Tools and References, and you've got to click this one called Solver. That's the big thing. And then you record the macro. Now, when you record the macro, I have to put this solver reset. So this, all I did was after we made the tools and references and go to solver and click on that one, after you do that, then you put the solver reset in, and you just make your macro and then run the solver. Okay, and that's all it does. And I hope I've gone through enough kind of solar issues. I guess the one other thing to discuss very, very quickly is that this scenarios, you see I have all of these different scenarios with respect to the cost of capital. And then this is the index function. I mean, this is the index code. So all I'm doing is taking these things. I'm putting all of these different potential carrying charges, inflation rates, equity returns, debt returns, debt interest rates, and all of that, and just so these numbers come from that scenario. That's where you can see they come from. So to summarize, I hope you see. I hope I'm being a little more clear on some of these videos, but I hope you can see the importance of some of these variables. I hope you can see this. Not necessarily, you don't want to necessarily put exactly the amount of solar as your load. Okay, and I hope you see that the ultimate question is what kind of total cost you have, total levelized cost you have for solar versus the variable cost for the diesel. And that's the starting point. And I really think, I'm rambling a little too much, but I really think this is the way to start thinking about the battery analysis in this kind of simple kind of island scenario. And it turns out to me not quite as simple as I thought, but it forces you to really think about what's really driving you, driving things, and not use some kind of simplistic LCOE that's a little perhaps a little too basic for this sort of analysis.